Listeners, welcome to this week's episode of Tales of Abundance. Thank you for joining us as always. I am here with Dr. John. Anthony is off with family this week, but good day, John. How are we doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing good. I'm excited about this. So later on, we're gonna get into New Year's goals, but more habits, I think. But
Yeah.
we'll let listeners take that where they want, and creating some good habits, for the new year. But before that, let's jump into our abundance briefing. The first thing we were going to mention is you brought up the OpenAI raise. You want to tell people what that is a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like OpenAI just raised $100 billion on an $830 billion valuation, which means I didn't even know what you call it. Like, is it a pegacorn? If it's a Pegasus Andy unicorn and you have a $1 trillion valuation in your startup, I don't know what that looks like, but $830 billion valuation, like that's someone's doing something well.
Yeah, and by the way, pre-revenue, or not pre-revenue, pre-profit. This is a company that's losing money. I mean, they're really raising money because their run rate's so high and they're losing so much money, right? But they're trying.
Yeah.
That's how important they think it is to win this race. So
Amazon did the same thing, right? Where they were not profitable for a very long time, and
right.
not profitable. I mean, I don't know what that looks like from a cash flow perspective, but at the end of the day, I mean, a lot of people must believe in you if you get $100 billion in investment with $830 billion valuation. It's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, it's we do have this, what do you call it, survivor's bias or whatever. Like, we talk about Amazon, but how many other companies tried that and it didn't work, right?
Yeah.
So how many, is that the strategy, or is that, the unicorn that happened to work? And I think right now somebody's going to win the unicorn thing and be a multi-trillion-dollar company, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing that comes to mind, I heard a financial analyst talking about how the AI play is kind of hard to play right now. And he was saying, like, Nvidia is the only ones really making money. And there's that, but that's, the picks and shovels route. And what he was saying is really the only other way to play AI right now, that's before these, money raising, was by Tesla. Because really Tesla is really an AI company and robotics company where they're going. So my guess is, if it's that hard to play it, and I hadn't really thought about this because most of my excess wealth goes into Bitcoin, but I mean, people are chomping at the bit to throw money at this. So
I just asked Gemini while we're here, how many trillion-dollar companies exist in the world today, and the answer is 12, not including OpenAI, but there are 12 trillion-dollar companies out of the entire world of companies.
By the way, if we really wonder how much inflation we have, that should tell you, because before COVID, do you know how many we had?
I have no idea.
I'm guessing zero. It rhymes with hero.
Yeah, none. Yeah.
Right? We had none. Yeah. And now we have these companies that are worth,
Just think about the $830 billion valuation for a minute. Like, if it were to double in valuation, it puts it in the top 9 companies in the world. If it were to triple in valuation, now you're in the top 6.
Right.
If it were to quadruple in valuation, you're in the top 5. And if it's 5x, you're in the top 3. So like, depending on what you're betting on, like, it's just, I mean, not my world. I don't live in that world, but the investment bankers that put that deal together, like, hats off to them. Like, I don't know if it's a good deal or a bad deal, but like, how cool to be able to work on a deal like that, at least.
Yeah. All right. So very cool. So lots of money going into AI. We'll see how this plays out.
It's just one company, right? It's not to mention all the other companies.
Right. Oh yeah.
It's funny. I'm looking at the top 12: Nvidia, AI; Apple, AI; Microsoft, AI; Alphabet, Google, AI; Amazon, AI. Top 5 companies, all AI something.
Hold on. You're an Apple user. Are you trying to say Siri is AI?
Well, I mean, they're certainly investing in AI. So.
All right. I'm just had to take
there's this Apple intelligence, right?
Okay. All right.
And then my wife, not to be confused with my wife, who has Amber intelligence.
All right. There we go. All right. Another dad joke. So moving on
to
one of the other trillion-dollar companies, Meta. What do you want to tell listeners about the new video model?
Well, I think they said that they just are releasing some new AI that's going to come out and be better at producing video and digital pictures. And I think this is, to me, this is the kind of the cool thing, because we're such a visual society that when we have AI that can start producing video, I think there's a lot of danger to that, by the way, with the deep fakes and all that stuff. But there's also some cool stuff that we'll be able to do with education and, in medicine. Like, I just think there's a lot of really cool things that unlocks. I also recognize that when you are creating video of something, whether it's a natural video or animated video, whatever the case may be, how much data that takes and consumes. So I recognize some of the difficulties with that, but it's cool to see that a company like Meta is putting money forward into, I think the project is called Mango, which I appreciate. So Nano Banana over on Gemini's side, and then Mango. I'm just curious who's going to get into like vegetables instead of fruits to start naming them over there.
Oh boy. All right, another dad joke. There we go.
The dad jokes are how we transition, Randy. I know how to get you off the topic. If I want to move you along, I just tell you a really bad joke.
There we go. All right. So National Geographic just highlighted 9 major breakthroughs from 2025, right? And I know a lot of people are expecting more next year. A couple of these are right. I'm not going to read all 9 of them. I don't want to, but one of them I think is interesting: needle-free allergy rescue for kids instead of them having to take like an EpiPen and things like that. So having a needle-free rescue. It just says giant leaps in regenerative medicine. And anyway, so basically what that is we're moving closer and closer to regrowing human tissues. Here's one near and dear to your heart. A cure for type 1 diabetes is close. The breakthrough: new stem cell therapies such as VX-880 are successfully restoring insulin production in patients. In clinical trials, patients who previously relied on daily insulin injections began producing their own insulin after receiving infusions of lab-grown pancreatic islet cells, or however you say it.
Islet cells, yeah. Islet cells, yeah.
You want to talk?
It's super cool.
Have you dug into this? Or, I mean, this is right in your wheelhouse.
Well, we focus really on type 2, and I think one of the big misconceptions for people is that type 1 and type 2 are really similar, but they're almost exactly the opposite. Type 1, you stop producing insulin. Type 2, you're producing too much insulin. You have insulin resistance is the real problem. So insulin is really important for people with type 1 diabetes, and so that's amazing, right? So the number of people with type 1 diabetes is a much smaller number than it is with type 2 diabetes, but it is an insulin-dependent condition in almost every case. And so at the end of the day, that's amazing. I think we're seeing some people that have, juvenile onset is pretty typical for type 1. We are seeing some cases of adults that are, becoming type 1. And so this is really good news. I think it's really good news because it's not just great for what's happening with insulin. There's some other things that happened where they're talking about using CRISPR for like very hyper individualized therapies. I think that's super cool. Like if we can keep going down that direction, you and I have had lots of conversations around diet and exercise and diagnostics. And we've even talked about some of those in this show. I'm a fan of like anything we can do to get more personalized diagnostics, more personalized therapy. I think we're going to do a lot to move medicine forward in a really great way.
All right, the 5th one is reversing kidney damage, and basically they're talking about the GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic being able to not only what they're being used for weight loss, but they can actually reverse kidney damage. So I know that's also in your wheelhouse. Do you have any comments there?
Yeah, I haven't seen that research. I'm super interested to see that research and what we're doing to kind of regenerate with stem cells. And I don't know that the GLP-1 will do it itself. Sometimes the body can heal itself if you give it enough space to kind of do that. So I'm super hopeful that we're finding answers that we can actually not just take diabetes into what NIH is now calling remission, but we can also then help people, restore the damage that's been done with hyperglycemia. So that one's pretty exciting. Again, I haven't seen the studies yet, but really excited about that.
All right, and real quickly, we got AI-assisted IVF babies. I don't even want to unpack that because that could go anyway, or dystopian and whatever, but it's interesting. And the last one on the list, number 9, I'll skip a couple, but is the end of cervical cancer and the breakthrough through a combination of widespread HPV vaccination and new screening technologies. Health organizations declared that cervical cancer is on the brink of being the first non-communicable disease to be eliminated as a public health problem. So
I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of the investments over a long period of time start to come to fruition. And so my hope is that with using the use of kind of not just generative AI, but predictive AI and all the other ways that we use compute power, like finding ways to move advances in medicine faster, into reality. And so I cross my fingers and like, here's hoping, right? Like let's keep moving these and let's make them affordable. I think it's one thing to have the answers. It's another thing to have the answers and make them affordable for people. We can talk about that as a whole separate probably topic.
Agreed. All right, let's move on to fusion without the dad joke this time. So fusion energy, and we've talked about energy. This is probably more my wheelhouse, right? Like I think this is
Yeah.
a major threat to America. I think this is if you go throughout history, as energy has expanded, so has the quality of life, right? We went from humans to burning wood was more productive, right? Then coal was more efficient, and humanity grew, even though
Yeah.
coal had, it had all the pollution and everything, but we started growing. And then, it's just going to next levels to now we're at a nuclear level and everything in
Yeah.
between. Humanity, we have become richer. And if you look at the places in the world that are really poor, they don't have access to energy.
Yeah.
Well, this AI race is going, like their growth, I mean, they're talking about like 100x and things that we need an ungodly amount of energy for that. Well, we talked about on a previous episode, China has from 20 or 25 years ago, they were behind us in energy production. Now they're basically triple, almost exactly 3x ours. They opened up several nuclear reactors this year. I think I read the other day, fact check me on this, but I believe they have 29 other plants that are under construction currently, with more coming, and they got more of everything, right? And so, anyway, the good news of this, because this is really important for us to win, but the U.S. Department of Energy just launched an Office of Fusion to help push the industry from labs to scale. And the World Economic Forum, I'm not the biggest fan of them, but is now openly talking about fusion hitting national grids in the 2030s. And a lot because they think AI is going to help solve the problem and take us over the fusion, and just solve some of the world's hardest physics problems that have never been solved. And then there's major reports that are just framing fusion as no longer just a physics experiment, but a viable path to abundant energy with a decade. So I don't know. We keep hearing. How long have we been hearing about fusion, John?
Yeah, a long time, and I think there was an alleged breakthrough a couple of years, what, 3, 4, 5 years ago, whenever it was. Was that a real thing? I haven't tracked that very closely. Was that a real breakthrough?
I think a lot of times these breakthroughs, they do it at a temperature that they can't sustain, or it's a step in the right direction, right? It's part of the scientific process. It's part of learning what works, what doesn't work. But I think a lot of times some of these breakthroughs, it's like, okay, now we're one step closer, but there's still these other list of problems to solve. That's my
Yeah.
takeaway from not being deep in this area. But it's exciting to me, right? If we have fusion, again, anything we can do to win the energy race right now is good for it's good for America, but it's good for humanity, right?
Yeah.
And all the other things that we can solve there.
So
So
here's the data from Gemini. I have not fact checked Gemini, but right now your number of triple the energy is about double and a half. So 2.5 times the amount of energy and growing. And we have 94 nuclear operational reactors in the U.S. today. China has 58. And so with those 58, they're 2.5x where we are, but they have 30 under construction. So they're going to be adding 50% more, which would put them at almost, almost 3.5 times the energy output. So
they're growing
right
super fast.
on the money.
They're growing super fast in solar and some other areas too.
Yeah.
They're actually shrinking their coal output. They're still using coal, but they're actually shrinking it. So,
Yeah.
anyway, all right. Let's. So the next one.
Interesting per capita usage in the U.S. as Gemini popped up was about 12,000 kilowatts hours per year, and about half that in China, about 6,000 kilowatt hours per year in China. So just one more piece of data for you.
Well, that's that much more that goes to factories and production and everything else, right? We're somewhere now between where we are and a Dyson swarm where we have, I mean, that might be hundreds or thousands of years in this. I don't know. You get,
I don't know what a Dyson swarm is, but
it's a concept that I think started out in sci-fi, but now it's become part of physics. Is that at some point the sun produces something like 99.99% of all the energy, right, in our system, and they're talking about building something around the sun to capture 100% of that, right? Like basically being able to produce something that actually we capture. We go from whatever little microscopic percentage of the sun's
yeah,
energy that we can get now to capturing all of it, which again, that might be thousands of years in the future. I don't know, but that's the end goal they're moving towards. So
that's some Star Trek stuff there.
yeah, and at that point, you have energy to do some, pretty extraordinary things, obviously. All right, let's go to our last topic in the abundance briefing: AI and work. So one of the questions we've asked a lot is AI destroying jobs? What are kids going to do in the future? What happens if you're graduating? And I know this is a concern, but a couple of things. OpenAI, now again, you got to remember the source. They're obviously motivated to sell this because of their new valuation. But 75% of workers using AI say it improves speed and quality. I would ask who the other 25% are, but anyway. And heavy users are saving up to 10 hours a week. And I heard something the other day that the jobs that are AI related, there's actually job growth in those areas, and the job cuts are coming in things that are actually not tied to AI right now. And the World Economic Forum, again, I can't believe I'm referencing them twice in one deal here, but it says their projection is that AI will displace 92 million jobs, but that it'll create 170 million. So that's a net positive of about 80 million jobs. And I don't know what that time frame is, or whatever. But thoughts?
Yeah, I think the thing we lose in all, and I don't think, I mean, directionally that seems right to me. I think that the saying has become, it's not that AI will replace jobs; it's that people who use AI will replace people who don't use AI in their jobs. And I think there is some truth to that. And when you say like, hey, it's going to create this many new jobs, people have to get comfortable with the idea of reskilling. And I think the choices are to be really great at something where computers aren't a part of the job minute by minute, or become great at using a computer. I don't know what jobs computers aren't getting used minute by minute. Like I was talking to somebody who worked in heavy equipment in the ag industry, and they're thinking about AI like really seriously. And so, even landscaping, Randy, where I joked with you a few months ago, maybe they're like, hey, I think that being a landscaper for residential landscaping is going to be like really safe for a while. And you're like, no, these robots are coming. And I was like, maybe after 10 years or something, but next 5, 6 years, you're fine. You're like, I think it's coming faster. And so you've often been really like saying it's going to happen, but it's sooner than later. And often it's been later than sooner. I think in this particular case, it might be much sooner than either one of us thought with some of these humanoid robots that are kind of being deployed. And, so we've really got to think through like, what does that mean for how not just the technology jobs of the world exist, but how do the non-technology jobs need to incorporate technology? And so I'm viewing AI, like being similar to the way that people have computer use. Like, do you use, a personal computer was a question, 25 years ago. Now the question might be, how will you use AI? So
Yeah, it's becoming almost or maybe even a requirement for most jobs, in my opinion, or
yeah,
either are or will be soon. But
yeah,
look, humanity has always. There used to be 99% of Americans or whatever worked on the farm, and
yeah.
now those jobs went away. Farming has become much more efficient, and that allows people to be doctors, engineers, or ditch diggers, whatever else, right? But I mean, and everything in between. Or
And it really
it
blows me
just
away. Like
frees.
even, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it frees up human intelligence to work on bigger problems.
Yeah, I've even heard stories. I'm again not my world, so I don't know a ton. But like I've heard like fighter pilots aren't just going to be fighter flying their own plane. They're going to have like a team of drones around each fighter plane, and like I don't again whether that's true or not doesn't matter. The idea that one person is controlling a series of AIs or robots or whatever, I think that is some type of future that's headed our direction for probably most roles.
Yeah, I heard Palmer Luckey on an interview, and his company has created, and what they do is with each of these planes, they've got like five mini planes or drones that the pilot can control. So if there's an enemy that there's something they want to scout, instead of them having to fly up there and say put themselves potentially at danger, they can send one or five of these and have them go do it. And then if the drone or the mini plane gets shut down, and they're pretty much AI controlled right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to create a lot of opportunities for people to become exceptional at problem solving. And so the challenge for people entering into the workforce is learning how to problem solve and getting the experience. So that's something that, people need to be thoughtful about. And I think just in general, people are going to have to be the best problem solvers, I think, are going to have the most opportunity. I'm not sure if that's really different than years past, though.
Yeah, I think there's opportunity in the world like there's never been in history, right? Like the
Hmm.
number of kids almost that go, they're just young and they start a unicorn, $1 billion company. It seems like just, it's not even news anymore when they do it. But on the other side, you look at that, that's not the experience of 99.99%, right?
Yeah.
So on one hand, there's this massive opportunity because of technology, but on the other hand, most people either don't know how or aren't motivated or whatever to, or
Well,
confident enough, whatever, to participate in it.
yeah, and I still find that AI is really good for me when I'm in areas of expertise where I really understand something, but it can very easily lead me astray in areas where I don't. And so that's why I'm careful when I'm fact checking you on these energy stats, for example. Like, I don't know. I want to make sure that I don't, I'd have to go fact check that to really, really know, but for me, it's directional.
For whatever it's worth, I saw a chart on the weekend that was almost triple, exactly triple. Like that's how much
Yeah,
they've grown. But so it could just be the timing, but it could be the chart I looked at is wrong. That's a possibility as well. So,
sure. Yeah, yeah, of course.
all right, listeners, we will be back with our main topic. We're going to talk about New Year's goals, goal setting, New Year's resolutions, but really we're going to dive into habits when we come back from the break. Hey, it's Randy from Tales of Abundance. Is starting a business part of your journey? Do you have ambition but no clear path? Maybe you feel trapped in your current career. Do you want a real business that can produce $250,000 or more income for you and your family? We have an opportunity for a profitable business that can be part of your path to abundance. I want to personally invite you to see the proven system we've built. It's designed to give you that freedom and control you've been searching for. Visit premiumcabinets.com/abundance to learn more. That's premiumcabinets.com/abundance. Listeners, welcome back. As I'm still here with John, and if you haven't downloaded, subscribed, told your friends, go do that now, or just spread the good word. We would appreciate it, and the holiday cheer. John, we're going to talk about goal setting and habits a little bit, New
Yeah.
Year's resolutions, because it's that time of year, right? And people have been doing this for, I don't know, as long as I can remember. But we're going to dive into habits after that more. So let's talk a little bit. And a couple weeks ago, we did a year-end planning, so we went into some of this then. But just give people an overview on New Year's resolutions, habits, goals, setting this time of year. It's very common.
I think today one of the things we might dive into is like, why is it that New Year's resolutions fail so badly? Because you have had New Year's resolutions. You've started off the year with all the greatest intent, and then at some point throughout the year, like usually the joke that people tell about is like joining a gym. And if
Mm-hmm.
you go to the gym in January, it's full, and you go in April, and it's not. Have you done that before? Have you set resolutions that?
Yeah, I mean, we all have, right? And sometimes it's because I was too lazy and I didn't make it happen. And sometimes it was because I set the wrong goal, right? And I just
I think
wasn't
I think
motivated to work on it.
And I think sometimes we set too big a goal too, right? Like sometimes we just stretch ourselves too far. Like I want to become, fluent in Spanish. That was the one you called me on a few years ago because I put it on my New Year's resolution 2 or 3 years in a row, and I hadn't actually moved toward it. And then one year I put, I'm going to spend 20 hours learning Spanish, and I hadn't even done that. And then the next year you're like, hey man, if you can't even spend 20 hours on it during a year, can we either get serious about it or take it off your list? And so I really thought about it, and I took it off my list. And that's not because I don't want to learn Spanish, but there's other things I want to do more. And so at some point in my life, that remains on my bucket list. But until I can get really serious about the habit of doing it, I was trying to get real with myself about that. And so
I bet you could give AI, you could schedule a daily task to have AI give you like a 5-minute lesson every day that I bet would accept. If you really, again, I'm not encouraging you to put it back on the list, but I bet it would be easier now than ever before.
yeah, but I think I totally agree with that, by the way. I think that's true, it would be. And I don't know if that's the most important like takeaway for people. Like, I think that people need to have everyone needs a different set of tools about how they're going to be setting objectives for themselves. And for some people, it's like goal setting, and that's the right answer. For other people, it's like a goal is too rigid, and they just need to have kind of a direction. And so I know people that like they'll pick like one or two or three words for the year, and those are their words. You were talking to Ryan, our producer, before the show, and he's like he has annual themes. And I think that whatever works for the person, if it's setting a goal that's like a hardcore, like data driven goal, amazing. I do that some years for some things. For other people, it's like if I just want to be directional about it, I think that's fine too, as long as we're checking in and moving toward it on a regular basis. And so that's kind of where I landed with the journal that I put together for myself, and I've given it out to tons of my clients over the years. Was like, you can have an annual goal or an annual objective, but at the end of the day, I have a monthly, like, here's what I'm trying to get done this month, and then every day, what am I doing to move toward that? And I want it to be focused and not too much stuff. And my list usually starts with like 20 or 30 things from my bucket list, but I've got to really whittle it down to like, what's the number one most important thing this year? My fitness is a great example of that. Fitness was in my top 5 for a number of years, and I gained weight and I lost fitness over a period of years while fitness was one of my top 5. Finally got to a point where I was like, this is ridiculous. It's got to be my number one thing. And it became my number one thing. My habits supporting that changed. And I started spending my time, my energy, my money on the thing that I said was most important to me. Because if you're not spending your time, your energy, your money on the thing that's most important to you, maybe it's not most important to you.
Yeah, I relate much more to the directional, right? I used to set
Yeah.
very specific goals. I used to have a plan, and I have become more, I'm moving in this direction, or here's the thing. In fact, I do most of my goal setting on a daily basis, which is a big change from what I did 30 years ago, right? But now I might set weekly goals. Like, here's the one big thing I want to accomplish. But I have a daily conversation. I told you I built an AI clone of myself, and I've got different personas within the clone for different things, but one of them is as a coach. And I told it
Yeah.
how I wanted to be coached. And so every day it starts out with, here's a suggestion. I tweak it a little bit, and I say, here's the 1 to 3 things that I am going to do today for sure. And then I usually have stuff that if I get done with that, I can
But
go.
directionally where you want to go, right? Like that's the key, right? Is like you've told it. Maybe you
Yeah.
don't know what city you want to be in, but you want to go northwest, or
Yeah,
like that's
you know this about me. Listeners may not understand as well. My brain works a little different than a lot of people's too, right? That I think of things in a 30,000-foot view, and I connect a lot of dots really quickly, and I start with where I want to go, and then for me now it's like, okay, where do I got to go? What's the next milestone? What do I have to do today to get that done? Right?
that's exactly right. I think that's you're doing goal setting. You're just picking the goal to be ones you're going to accomplish more effectively, and I think that's the right approach.
Yeah. Well,
Is
I don't know. The other thing worked for me 30 years ago, right? Like really having a plan and like I don't create a business plan for a business anymore, but 30 years ago, I'd have these really detailed business plans. And
yeah.
even though I probably never read it again, the fact of creating it locked it into me. And I was like, okay, now I needed that. And now I don't. So I think
I
that's
think
still
there's
working.
whatever way you take kind of the where you want to be for delayed gratification and break it down into steps. Like because what you're describing both ways, both with a business plan and with just a broad direction, either one of those things gets you to kind of work it backwards. I think the danger is in not working it backwards. So
Right.
saying you want to be northwest, but then walking southeast, like that's where people bump into problems. And it's
Agreed.
like you're not going to get where you want to go if you're not taking the right steps to get there. But I do think it can be overwhelming for people to kind of figure out like what exact thing. I wrote down some goals back in, I remember writing them down in 1995. I wrote down some very specific goals and I lost the piece of paper for a long time. And then I came back and I had like a 10-year goal that I accomplished at the 11th year that I'd forgotten I'd even written it down. I think the brain works that way sometimes. And
Yeah.
so, anyway, at the end of the day, I think there's lots of goal setting methodologies. Pick one. I think the SMART acronym of something specific, measurable, attainable, reasonable, and time bound, I do think those things are important. I do think that smaller is easier to bite off than larger. And I do think that knowing directionally where you want to go so that you can move steps in that direction is generally important. And I think changing the tool to work for you is really healthy. And so use the tool that works for you in that moment.
Yeah, I'm arguing both sides of this, but I think that where I'm at now is probably healthier for more people just because the world we live in 25, just about 26, in 2026, things are moving so fast, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just thinking about a lot of the things I'm working on. I could set a 1-year goal, but the fact is, I cannot predict what's happening with AI, robotics, automation, and a lot of the things that where I'm spending a fair amount of my time right now that I don't know what ChatGPT or Grok or Gemini or some company I've never heard of is going to create. And I think it's harder to plan a year. And that's a little bit scary, to be honest.
Maybe that's true. So let's break that down for a minute. So let's just kind of go into the 5 F's for a second. Like for fun this year, like I might just make a checklist of things I want to do for fun. For my family, I might make like, hey, here are my intentions. Like for me, it's my intention to spend time with my family in very specific ways. Like cool, that's an intention, not a goal. By the way, if you have goals that involve other people, it's probably pretty important to agree with those people that they're on the same page. Otherwise, it becomes really difficult to hit those
Right.
goals, right? So then we start to get into things like finance. Okay, well, finance, if I know I want to save a certain amount of money, well, I need to earn a certain amount of money. Okay, I think that's kind of the easy math to do, maybe. Then we get into like the personal part of like personal development and how we're going to move forward in an AI world. And that's where I think if it's like, if I don't know where I'm going to be in a year, that can overwhelm someone to the point of being just paralyzed. And so maybe it's like, hey, look, for the next 3 days, I'm going to learn how to use Gemini. For the next 3 days, I'm going to learn how to use Nana Banana. For the next 3 days, I'm going to learn about vibe coding, like whatever that looks like. I just think that if you can get those smaller goals where it's like, I'm just going to build a skill set. And here's what I tell people is like, do things that open as many doors as you want to have open and try not to do things that close doors unintentionally that you don't want to close, right?
Yeah. Well, what you were saying when you were talking about the different things there with vibe coding and AI and stuff, it made me think of what you mentioned with Ryan earlier about having themes, right? The theme
Yeah.
might be AI, or I am going to become AI competent or comfortable, or
Yeah.
whatever it means for that person, and then you break it down into specific daily, weekly tasks, whatever, or whatever works for people.
Well, here for me, I'll give you one really clear example. Like, I definitely want to be doing things in the last 10 years of my life that require me to be very active. And so I've also got athletic onset asthma, and I need to figure out, like, okay, what does that mean? And so one of the things I'm curious about now that I need to talk to my doctors about is like VO2 max and my aerobic capacity. And what do we know about that today? And so the goal for me is not to be like at my perfect VO2 max for when I'm 85. My goal is to be like doing the things I need to be doing today to make that part of my world better.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So it's just like what are the little things that I want to do or avoid?
So you're getting into habits now, right? We talked about
Mm-hmm.
habits. So let's talk about that, right? Because if whether we have a specific goal, I'm going to do blank, or we have a direction or a theme or whatever you want to talk about it, it doesn't matter if we don't take action, right? I mean, we got to do something. So that's where the daily tasks, but Talk about habits a little bit, John, and how, what habits, why are they important, and then what habits have you found useful?
I mean, some habits are important. Some habits are probably bad for us too, right? So I think we could argue that we all have some bad habits also. And so I think the way that I look at, like, there's projects I want to get done in my life, and those are things I'm going to do and do them once, and I work toward them with like a I don't really have project plans in my life, but it's kind of, it's like, hey, here are the things I need to do to get there. And milestones, whatever. But habits are things like my health related habits where I just want to have a long term sustainable behavior that I think is something that's going to be good for me. Drinking water, for example. Learning Spanish might be a habit that I want to pick up because I want to get into like full immersion Spanish. So what are those habits? And I don't, I mean, for me, I think that there's a limited number of habits you can change at a given time. So trying to change too many at once can be tough. So I try to make really small changes and encourage other people to make really small changes that are long-term sustainable, like things you want to do for the long term.
So, for example, it's been, what, a year or 2 years ago now, you started working out with a trainer X
Mm-hmm.
days a week, right?
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's a habit that you've developed, and a good habit that's moving you toward where you want to go,
That's
right?
right. Yeah, but it's not so rigid that, like, the other day I got home, my plane was delayed for an hour. I didn't get to bed till almost 1 a.m. I had a really important meeting at 9 a.m. And so I felt free to cancel on that session. Whereas, if it was like must hit, X number of training sessions this year, cannot cancel, like that may not have been good for me, right? So I give myself a little bit of freedom to, like, say no because there are other health things I need to be doing, like sleeping, for example.
Right. But your habit. How many days a week do you work out with said trainer?
Typically 3, and now I'm adding days of working out without the trainer in addition to that to kind of increase my aerobic capacity.
Right. So you've got a habit of working out 3 days a week, right?
Yep.
Which
Yep.
historically that's what I've done, right? 3 to 5 days. I mean, I force myself to go at least once a week. I try and get there too. I've just been busy enough, and I've made it less of a priority, right?
Yeah.
So that's a concern. But I do more jumping on a trampoline while I'm working and stuff like that now, so to try and offset it.
When doing things with other people, right? Like that's the thing that makes it easier. Like, it's like if I had to do this podcasting thing on my own without you here, it probably wouldn't get done. With the two of us here, it gets done, when it needs to get done. And so I think having community is a really important part of that. And so when I put this journal together, I was mentioning to you, I asked a lot of people who are using it, like, what is it about this process that is important to you? And they said, it gives me focus, it gives me accountability, it gives me a sense of community, and I get to learn about new things. And it was pretty consistent across everyone who was using it, that those are the 4 things they got out of kind of reconnecting with their habits, their goals, their community on a regular basis. And so I think those 4 things are important for us as humans: focus, accountability, community, and learning.
I mean, what other habit? You've got a lot of good habits, right? So I'm not saying you don't have bad ones, right? But give me some other good ones you have. What's a good habit?
I think, so for relationships, I think my wife and I, we check in every day. And so we have a time where we sit down, and it's not anything formal. It's not like we have a meeting every day, but we check in. Like, one of the things I'm very interested in is, how did your day go today? And she tells me about her day. And then I'm very interested about, what do you have on the schedule for tomorrow? Like, what's your day going to be like tomorrow? And she has the same curiosity about my day. And so I find those are easy ways to get really connected. So I think that's been a really, really good habit for us relationally. I think with my kids, I've got 2 kids that are out of the house and 1 kid still at home. And so for the older kids, that same kind of like curiosity without being smothering for them. So it's not daily for them, but it is, I'm very curious about their life, and I want to understand more about how they think and how they're processing information. Not so that I can parent them as much as I can just have a relationship with them where they can feel comfortable, coming to me. So I think I have some relationship habits that I think that have served me really, really well. So I'm just trying to walk through. That's the family stuff. On the fitness stuff, we talk about physical fitness. On the mental fitness, I try to always do something to be learning. So obviously getting my doctorate later in life was one. I just joined a group here in town, called EO, that is about learning. There's a lot about community and learning, so relationships and learning in that community. So that'll give me some structure for that, both professionally and personally, which I'm really happy about. And then I've got on the fun side, I have some things we do for fun, both large and small. So travel is a large scheduled thing we do with the family every year, and then small fun things. I just have some habits about how I have fun with friends and then with my kids and my wife, and so that's I think that's all just becomes part of my kind of week to week stuff to do. Finance, I try to make my habits automatic, like so that I don't have to actually do anything. So like my savings, I have an automatic savings plan, and I try to set things up so that I can not get in the way of being financially successful as much as possible. Let's see. So that's fitness. Oh, spiritually, I think I've got some habits around how I pray that work for me. I have some triggers that trigger me, so that I'm praying more than just an hour on Sunday when I'm in church. And so that just became a real clear instance of like habit stacking, which is where you take one habit and attach it to an existing habit. And so I kind of do that, some habit stacking. So that's fitness, family, finance and professional, fun. Which one am I forgetting? Friends. With friends, I would say this is a place that I need some more work on. I used to have that kind of with Sunday Fun Day kind of baked into my week every week. And when the pandemic hit, that kind of went to crap. And so I've got to, like, my wife and I are trying to do some things to get that habit of friendship reinstilled back into our regular rhythm. But that's one that really fell down in the pandemic that we've identified that we want to really retool that in kind of a new world to kind of be more deliberate about how we spend time with friends and not, again, not highly structured, but just making sure it doesn't fall off the radar. It's too easy in today's busy life to make that just to not to
We've
let that
become
slip.
terrible at it.
Yeah.
Just terrible at it.
Yep.
So I mean, I'm just talking about me and Julie. Like I don't
Yeah.
know. You just used to be a lot better at it, and it seems like now it always gets pushed off, or we can do that tomorrow or next week.
Well, then in the next week, what I'll do is I'll go through the 5 F's and I'll write down like what habits I want to keep doing that I've been doing, what habits I want to stop doing, and then what habits I want to change, and then what habits. So it's like start, stop, keep, continue. What do I want to start? What do I want to stop? What do I want to continue? What do I want to change? And it'll be a pretty long list. And what I'll do is I'll just like scratch it out. Like I'll make sure that I don't have right.
Right.
All like it won't be too many. I'll try to make fewer changes that are really important to me, and the rest of them I'll just put into a parking lot for next year.
Well, and a few takeaway things about habits for me is I think it's important that we think about what daily habits do we do, right? I think that's the one.
Yeah.
Some of those might be something as simple as brushing our teeth, right?
Yeah.
Or flossing, or like a zillion things that we do on a daily process. It could be just getting up and making a cup of coffee in the morning. So we have daily habits, and then we have weekly, right? We might have a weekly staff meeting or whatever else we do weekly. For me now, it's more like I go to the gym weekly. Then quarterly. There's quarterly planning meetings. There's annual. We have things at different things. I had a conversation with Anthony last week, and I was like, "Are all the kids coming? The grandkids?" He's like, "Yes, they're all going to be there. He's like, "They have no choice." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "It's mandatory. Like for Christmas, it's just we've told them it's
Yeah.
mandatory. You have to be there. This is their happy time and their important time." And his
Yeah.
whole
Yeah.
family gets along great. So they come in from all over the country and they're there. And they've got another family thing that they do with an extended family once a year, right? And so they've got annual habits that keep them,
Yeah.
in the
I
loop.
think those traditions are great too, right? Like every family gets to kind of create their own traditions. And some people carry them forward from generation to generation. Some create new ones. I think that's great.
Yeah. So again, it can be daily and they can be simple, brushing your teeth, right? Or it could be big, right? I mean, journaling. I mean, I don't care what it is that people are doing, but what is that? And I think the other thing that's really helped me as I was thinking about this is anything that I don't want to do or that's hard or that I might just follow something shiny or more interesting. I need to have habits first thing in the morning to get me going on the right track, right? So
Yeah.
like I mentioned, I check in with my clone coach and set something. I do that. I get up, I have my coffee, I feed the dog, we hang out, outside a little bit, etc. And then when I sit down to work or stand to work, the first thing I do is what am I going to accomplish today, right? If I wait till 3
That's
o'clock, that's just not effective.
Yeah, that's a pretty consistent theme that I've heard from people that like, I'll get more done before 10 a.m. on Monday than most people get done all week. People that have like a really good list.
Yeah.
And I'm the same way, by the way. If I work it out early in the morning and get it done, it's really straightforward. If I wait until later in the day, there's probably people out there who are the opposite and nothing wrong with that. But I do find that for the people that I talk to, very common to try to knock out their three things they want to get done in a day before they get interrupted by the day.
Yeah. By the way, I'm also a big believer. If you just pick one thing to get done every day, you are going to beat 99% of the people out there,
I think
right?
that's right.
I mean, most people go through the whole week. Your term is feeding the animals, not building the barn, right? And they just go through
Yeah.
the whole week feeding the animals and never do anything else. They never plow the field, build the
Well,
barn, whatever else.
yeah, we should talk about that for a minute so that people who know what that is. So it's like if you live on a farm, and of course you've lived on a farm, I've never lived on a farm, so you've got to clean me up here where it doesn't work. But the animals have to get fed every day. Like
Right.
if you don't feed the animals every day, then the animals die. And so that's the work that you have to do. It's the constant work. And if you just feed the animals and you don't build the barn, you don't expand the farm, then you're not growing in maybe a way that you want to be. And so building the barn is that work that we do that it's not urgent, right? But it's important if assuming that building the barn is your goal. Like that's the analogy, right? So spending time to spend an hour or two a day on, but you can't only focus on building the barn because if you only build the barn, you stop feeding the animals and the animals all die. You've got to start all over. So it's really balancing the tactical day-to-day execution of life with the strategic, important want to grow, and learning how to balance those things is really, really important because if all you do is feed the animals, you never build the barn. If all you do is build the barn, the animals die, you got to start all over. So it's learning how to balance those couple of things. And usually it's less barn building, more feeding the animals is usually the right type of combination.
Yeah, it's and the other thing I think a lot of people that I witness, especially entrepreneurs and small business owners, I think a lot of them get caught up in putting out fires, right? And they spend
It's feeding the animals, right?
but there is a lot of time where they're putting out the fires, and sometimes it's
Yeah.
hey, let's create better systems and processes so we don't have so many damn fires. Would be a much better use of that time.
Yeah, and you have to figure out like if the fence keeps breaking in the same spot, maybe the goal is not to fix the fence. Maybe the goal is to move the fence post over or whatever you have to do. And Randy, I didn't learn until very late in life, like let's say the last 5 years. Someone used to say a stitch in time saves nine, and I didn't know what that meant. And I learned that when people had just one or two garments in their closet, you could stitch a small hole with one stitch, or if you waited later, it would take 9 stitches to stitch a much bigger hole.
Okay, I'd never heard. I'm fascinated, by the way, by a lot of these sayings and where they come from. I
Yeah,
find really interesting. We could maybe even do. I got ideas of how to do an episode on that might be kind of fun, actually.
yeah.
So
Now we just toss clothes away. It's like give them away and buy new ones, and it's like we don't think about stitching our clothing or
yeah.
yeah,
Well, and that's you know, I used to think of that as like, boy, it's sad. We're so wasteful now. But I think in more Tales of Abundance theme, right? Like that is the world we live in. That once upon a time when people had clothing, I mean, that was a treasured. That's
Mhm.
one of the basic human needs. And people, you had it and you wore it, and you couldn't afford to just be buying new clothes all the time. Now
Yeah.
people buy clothes, hardly wear them, throw them away, give them to the Salvation Army, or something else. I
I do
mean,
have a little bit of worry about the trash that it causes. Like I don't, it's not my issue, but yeah,
no, I mean you're not wrong. I mean, that trash patch out in the middle of the Pacific, I forget how big it is, but I'm pretty sure it's bigger than Texas. And if you've ever driven
yeah,
across Texas, Texas is a damn big state, right?
yeah,
So, and there's a trash patch, and I know I was in Costa Rica. This is not that trash patch, but I was in Costa Rica and we went 25 miles out deep sea fishing one time. This is years ago. And there was we basically started fishing next to this trash patch. It almost was like those were lily pads that the fish were under or something. And
yeah,
but, I mean, that thing was big, right? Like, I mean, I don't know what it was. I mean, it wasn't Texas, but I remember seeing that little tiny thing that was, I don't know, it's probably like an acre or something, right? I mean,
yeah,
or 2 acres or maybe even 5 acres. I don't know. Anyway, that's nothing compared to Texas, but yeah, that is a problem.
yeah. Well, think about that. There are people that have goals in their life to go clean all that stuff up, and that's a mass. So back to habits, like that's a massive goal that is like seemingly unreachable, like an intractable problem. But when you kind of break it down, like it's like, what can I do today? Like, what's the one thing that and it's almost like having a big ball of twine. And like, if you can find the end of that ball of twine and just undo it one little bit at a time, problems that seem impossible become a little bit more possible. And so if the habit seems overwhelming, it's like just break it down to something smaller, until it's so ridiculously easy, it's something you can do. And I think, any movement in the right direction is better than overwhelm that leads to no movement, right?
Yeah, I love that concept, John. I mean, that's kind of back to when we had Dustin on the episode talking about, healthy eating, his concept of move to the right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of you're talking about, right? Like just you don't have to. I do think a lot of people get overwhelmed.
Well, and that's even the journal that I have can be overwhelming for people, including myself at times. And so it's like, just do something less than. Like, just do something. Like, just move in the direction you want to move, right? Until you can find the next habit, and then build that habit, and then figure out the next one later. But trying to like lose all your weight at once, or be in perfect shape all at once, or run a marathon all at once, or that's how you get hurt. Right. And whether it's hurt by quitting or hurt by physically hurting yourself, like I think just, offering yourself a lot of grace to move in a good direction, that's a thing to do.
Yeah. So by the way, the kid you mentioned the cleaning up the oceans or whatever and all the trash.
Yeah.
We talked about this before, but I couldn't remember his name. But there was a Dutch kid that he started this when he was 16 years old.
Yep.
Boyan Slat. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. My Dutch isn't very good, but Boyan Slat started at 16, and they're cleaning up. They now have a 1.5 miles that funnels plastics, and they put it in that big patch that's out, in the Pacific, and their goal is to remove 90% of floating ocean plastic by 2040, which is pretty
That's amazing.
Cool. And by the way,
think about like all the microplastics that are getting into our bloodstream and into our brain, and all like that's just good for society, right? And hopefully they can find ways to recycle that and use that for something useful.
Yeah, and one of the really cool things there is I heard an interview where they were talking about this kid and what he was doing. So he got some people on board, and he raised, I don't know, I want to say a couple million, like it was enough to matter, but not the billions we're talking about from OpenAI earlier or anything like that. And so he raised this money, but he also didn't want to ever raise money again. So he's made this whole thing sustainable. When they collect all this plastic, they take it, they recycle it, and they turn it into products that you can then buy, right? Whether they're sunglasses or reusable cups or whatever, right? So now that he has turned it, what started as a charity is in essence a business doing charitable work, which is just a really cool, admiral, attaboy. So.
And then we got to move upstream, right? And it's like solve the problem, then figure out what caused the problem, and move upstream, hopefully, and we'll just keep going. So, I love that he's doing that in a capitalistic way too. I don't know much about the story, but it sounds, I'm sure we'll get comments that some part of it's not awesome. So, granted, I'm sure there's something imperfect about it, but directionally, I love that someone's trying to clean things up, make it sustainable using capitalism. Like that sounds like a pretty good direction.
Yeah. I love it. Let's put a bow on this thing, John. What else? What you got? Some final takeaways for listeners?
I mean, we need a dad joke to wrap this thing up, or what do we? No,
please,
that's probably not a great way.
Everybody's waiting to debate it.
I don't know if I have a great one. So I think for like maybe I'll let you know, like, so some of the things that I'm working on this year, Randy, like I'm going to continue to work on my habits with those 5 F's of the family, all the things. And so you can kind of hold me accountable. Right. And so then I've got some trips we're taking, I've got some fun stuff we're doing. But for me this year is really about trying to simplify and get less projects on my plate by the end of next year, which I think is, you've never heard me say that before. So we'll see if 2026 I can actually end 2026 with a little bit less to do than I ended 2025 with.
I laugh, John. It's out of love, but this reminds me of John and I were having a conversation, might have been in a meeting, I don't know, and he was talking about how much time he was going to have once he was done getting his doctorate, right? He was working on his doctorate, and he had to have all this time commitment, and all of a sudden that time was coming on. And I laughed at him, much like I did now. And
It's true.
because
That happened.
I was like, you're just going to fill it with other stuff. And I think now you're busier than you were then, or at least as busy. So I wish you luck. I'm going to laugh at you because I don't know what else to do, but
That's done with the listeners. That's done with love, though. I know how Randy's sending it. Like, he really does care. I get that.
right. I just, and if you want to open that up, then I'm 100% on board. I hope you succeed. And I've been burned before. So, so
How about you? What's one thing you're going to do end of 2026?
sorry, say the whole thing again. One thing I'm going to what in 2026?
End of 2026. What's different for you at the end of 2026?
That we have spun off of our main business. This new business is spun off, and that it's, we're able to comfortably pivot by the end of 2026.
Yeah.
That's
That's
the big
great. I
thing.
love
So I'm
that.
working on
Well,
that
we'll
on
check
a
in.
daily basis.
We'll check in here publicly for everyone and talk about how it's going.
Yeah. All right. Listeners, if you're still here, you obviously like us. Download, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, give us a thumbs up. You can go to the website, talesofabundance.com. I hope everybody has a happy holidays, whatever that is, Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever it is that you celebrate, and a happy new year. Listen and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Click follow for more content like this, or go to talesofabundance.com to join our community and get free tools.